But at this time, I am pleased to introduce Carl White. Carl White is the Senior Vice President in charge of banking supervision at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis and my boss. And Carl is also a long-standing member of the Planning Committee and has been part of our thinking as we've moved this annual conference, which we normally host in St. Louis, to a virtual environment. So Carl's going to offer his thoughts on what we heard and what we discussed today. Carl?
Thanks, Jim. So on behalf of the Federal Reserve System, I'd like to thank the Conference of State Bank Supervisors and the FDIC for their commitment to this conference. The strength of the partnership was evident throughout the planning process, especially as we realized the shift that we had to make this year from face-to-face to virtual. The change in format, while different from past conferences, inspired us to rethink certain aspects of the conference. And I'd like to thank all of our attendees for their engagement throughout today's proceedings. I'd also like to recognize members of my staff and others from various areas of the St. Louis Fed for their enormous efforts in once again putting together another great conference. So thanks to Jim Fuchs and his entire team. There's too many names to mention right now, but you know who you are. So thanks to all of you. The various elements of the conference have evolved over the past 8 years, but the underlying goal has certainly not changed, and that is to provide a forum to debate and discuss the latest in community bank research. So although we're only halfway through the conference, I think we learned a number of interesting things today, and I'd like to share some thoughts. First, regarding the CSBS survey, it allowed us to go beyond the numbers of the Paycheck Protection Program, which we've heard quite a bit about today, and hear firsthand from bankers on the benefits and challenges of the program. I'd like to personally commend CSBS and the State Bank Commissioners for making key modifications to the survey this year to give us insights into how community banks have been navigating through the pandemic. Although we're unfortunately not in a position to look back on this pandemic yet, I emphasize yet, we did learn that despite the challenges today's environment creates for community banks, there were a few bright spots. First of all, the survey noted that we saw another decline in reported compliance costs, and we also saw greater community bank satisfaction with technology. In fact, for some, the pandemic appeared to accelerate customer adoption of some of these technologies. Turning to Governor Bowman's remarks, we were given a glimpse of the insights she's gained in part through individual meetings, which are still ongoing, with each of the almost 700 community banks supervised by the Fed. I know that bankers in the St. Louis Fed District have really appreciated the opportunity to speak directly with her. She described how community banks stood shoulder to shoulder with their customers during the rollout of the PPP program. She said the program strengthened many pre-existing relationships between community banks and their borrowers, and also met the needs of new customers. And she also described how supervisory practices of the Fed have been adapted during the pandemic. Moving into the research, I'd like to thank our paper authors, our academic moderators, and our community bank discussants for their work preparing for today's conference. It remains a unique aspect of this conference that we're able to bring together the perspectives of community bank researchers, community bankers into our research sessions. I was able to sit in on research session 1, and we saw evidence of the important relationship between small business employment, small business lending, and small bank deposits. We also evidenced connecting the backgrounds of those that opened de novo banks and the business plans around those banks. And perhaps even more importantly, how the characteristics of those entrepreneurs impacted the performance of those banks. In research session 2, we were given an interesting look at the relationship between community development lending and investment and their impact on local economic activity, particularly on wages, employment, and the supply of affordable housing. We also saw evidence in the second paper in that session of how credit flows in the aftermath of a natural disaster. This paper has a lot of relevance today as we've had a series of extreme weather events in the Gulf this year. And we just recently heard from FDIC Chairman Helena McWilliams. She and Diane Ellis discussed not just the importance of small businesses in our economy and the importance of small business lending, but she also highlighted a challenge of measuring small business lending. They noted in the call report that we use small loans to businesses as a proxy for small business lending, but the FDIC looked a bit deeper into small business lending and found that we may be underestimating the amount of small business lending being conducted by community banks by as much as 23% compared to what we see in the call report. So to wrap up, as we close the formal proceedings for today, I hope that our registered attendees will stay with us for the next hour as we offer a number of post-plenary sessions. Each year, we're told that the networking that this conference affords is a key component of the proceedings. So the Planning Committee thought it would be a good idea to continue this, although a little bit different, certainly virtually, so that our registrants can talk to researchers and other conference participants in a more informal setting. So I encourage you to visit a couple of these sessions over the next hour. I suspect we'll have lots of interesting discussions and certainly Q&A. Day 2 of the conference starts at 1 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, and we'll hear from our community bank keynote speaker, Laurie Stewart from Sound Community Bank in Seattle, Washington. We'll also meet the winners of the 2020 CSBS case study competition from Mississippi State University. And our research sessions tomorrow will focus on local lending, credit access, and moral hazard issues. So we'll wrap up the day with a very interesting and unique panel discussion featuring a number of thought leaders who will discuss the opportunities and challenges facing community banks. So once again, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you in our post sessions and also tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Jim.
Great, Carl. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We appreciate you making the time. Obviously, switching things to a virtual format presents its own set of challenges, but your engagement around this conference, your interest, and the preparation by all of our presenters certainly supports the idea that continuing, even despite some of the challenges that we're all facing, as President Bullard mentioned, in our personal and professional lives, this is an important conference. There's an important research that we want to discuss. I can't thank the state banking commissioners enough for sticking to the CSBS National Survey to give us some real direct and current feedback, evolving issues on how community banks are navigating this pandemic. And it certainly gives us a foundation for future research and things to discuss at future conferences. So again, thanks to everybody.